you very much for your interest in the IR bill that is currently before the Parliament. It's called Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill, and that's currently at the moment before the Parliament. What I wanted to do was to give you an overview of the bill, talk about some of its more contentious elements, and have some, share some of my concerns. But I'm also want to hear as much as I can from the community about your concerns. So the bill is huge. It's actually it's a very significant piece of legislation and very complicated. Sorry, I'm looking for my copy of it. But it's my bag. Here it is. That's the bill. That's how thick it is. It's got, I think it is 25 sections of the bill, which are different, substantive. And so that's why it's such a complex bill. The truth is that there's a lot of really good stuff in the bill. And then there are areas where I think there's a real sort of lack of consensus and concern on. So I might start with where I think there's a lot of support in the bill. So, for example, there are sort of powers, there's a lot of in the bill which is directed around gender equality. So things like Part 5, which is about equal remuneration. And the purpose of this is to give the Fair Work Commission more power to make equal remuneration orders if it believes a gender is relatively underpaid. That's really positive. Again, there's some work specifically around expert panels. So the Fair Work Commission has expert panels that determine, whether equal remuneration and award cases. So again, they establish expert panels and a care and community sector. So there's a pay equity expert panel and a care and community sector expert panel. So again, these things are really around, I think, really gender equity. Other parts of the bill that are about gender equity are things like just pay secrecy, which says that people are no longer able to businesses are not able to ask their people or can oblige them not to share details of their pay. I'm very, generally supportive of that, though I do have some concern that some small businesses could unintentionally be subject to a $63,000 fine if they were using an old template there. There's some provisions around sexual harassment, anti-discrimination, where they're really updating the Act in so many different ways that to have better support for in the case of discrimination, and to bring the Fair Work Act and Fair Work Commission's work in line with some of the changes that are happening across the Parliament, such as the Respect at Work Bill. So generally, there's a lot of support around that. They've also got a provision which some people might be interested in around fixed term contracts, which says that people can't be engaged in fixed term contracts for more than 2 years, except in a raft of circumstances. I know some people are very supportive of that. Some businesses are concerned about that, but the general feeling is that there's enough provision that where a fixed term contract is appropriate because your contract with another business is of that nature, then it would make sense for it's appropriate to have that sort of exemption. There's some clearing up, I think, of things like zombie agreements or old agreements which are not in line with the current agreements, and making it easier make it easier to form agreements. And I think this is where the unions and the business community are really well aligned, in that they support reform of the Better Off Overall test, which is a test that is required when people are making agreements to make sure that an employee is better off than the award. And so they've made the bills is trying to make it easier for people to meet those requirements, and also get enterprise bargaining agreements approved quickly and easily, and not held up for bureaucratic reasons. So there's so there are lots of, I'd say, there's some very positive changes to the bill. And I think the biggest challenge on the bill, however, is, and one that you'll probably hear the greatest media about, is around what they call multi-sector agreements, or sorry, multi-employer agreements, and also around industrial relations, protected actions, which is basically strike action in particular, and also around some of the issues, some support around flexible work. So these are the areas where there is sort of less business and union agreement. So I want to just talk about multi-employer agreements, because I'm not sure what people know about this, and it is one that is certainly the most contentious piece. So the multi-employer agreements are agreements are currently allowed under the current Fair Work Act, which means that a different group of different employers have a similar agreement, have the same agreement with their employees, and so there have been cases where individual employers in the same sector have said, look, we want to get together and agree sort of wages and conditions, a change that is better than the award for our people, and it makes it easier for us to do what we do. So there's already that ability for a business to say, I want to form an agreement with just not my own workforce, but also with other companies. I think the government has rightly found that doing that across multiple employers is pretty tricky and difficult, and complicated and burdenful for employers. So they have, so they're proposing something different, but this is quite different. So currently, the employer has a choice whether it decides it wants to engage in a multi-employer agreement. Under this current version of the bill as it stands, an employer, if 50% of a workforce of an employer says we want to engage in multi-employer agreements, then the employer is obliged to start working with the employees and other businesses around multi-employer agreements. And this is the area that concerns people, businesses, the most, because employers could be grouped up in, perhaps a shopping centre. All the employees in a shopping centre say, look, we want to work together. It could be all across the supply chain. It all could be all the cafes in an area where, the workers could say, okay, encouraged by a union, let's come together and set a multi-employer agreement across, 10 businesses, 20 businesses, 5 businesses. And I think where the real challenge is with this approach, from a business point of view, is, it's hard, it's when good businesses I know work really hard to have great relationships with their employees, and to really listen to what their employees want and try and come up with answers that work for the business and work for them. If they are then forced to work with all these other different employers and employees, it makes it harder for them to do that effectively, come up with an agreement that actually works for the business, and works for the employees. There's a danger that a business will be dragged into an agreement that is just sends them broke over time, because they've been determined that this is the agreement that you need to agree to, whether or not it actually works for their business. Or perhaps the business wants to change. The business used to be a cafe that was open during the day. It then started to be a cafe that was very much open in the evening, and much more focused around evening. But the agreement that they might be on, and with all these other employees, might be very focused on working during the daytime, not the evening. And so that it would restrict the business's ability to move with the times and say, this is how the business has changed, and this is how we need to change it, with their workforce, because they're already tied into this agreement. And currently, as the legislation is written, it's very hard to exit that sort of multi-employer agreement. So I think there's a lot of concern about that, and also concern that there could be strike action. So that one employer might be have bad relationships with their employees, and so the employees want to strike, and the other members of that agreement might be encouraged, or currently as written, maybe brought into different strike action. Now, this isn't just about big business. This is about any business that employs more than 15 people, and this is a business that includes casuals. So if you're a busy cafe, you employ, 10 casuals and, 3 or 4 full-time staff, then this is an agreement that your business could be expected to get into. I think the government's argument on this is that this will drive up wages, and certainly I'm support very much that we need to grow wages, and that's really important. But if businesses are, if you're growing wages without actually growing how the business does better. So if you're just growing wages, but without the business actually improving and actually having a sort of increase in productivity, then you have, I think, a real challenge here where, we will have the danger of businesses, both going under. We will have actually, I think, if everyone is forced to do the same thing and have the same sorts of agreements, I think there's a real challenge that business actually won't be as dynamic. And then lastly, I just think this is extremely, potentially very costly to businesses. And spending thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on arbitration and going to the Fair Work Commission, where, to be honest, most businesses really don't spend their time. So that is why I'm particularly concerned about the multi-employer bargaining part of the bill. There is parts of the bill that is focused more on low-paid industry and in bargaining in those low-paid industries. And I feel that is of less concern, though my personal opinion is that we should be focused on getting agreements fixing the awards, because I think if we could increase the awards, as we just recently did in aged care sectors, you could ensure that some of the more lowly paid workers can still earn good wages across the board, and that would give, and while business still has the flexibility to run its businesses as it wants to and differently. So those are my current sort of high-level views on the bill. Jonathan from my team has been working very closely with me, and also lots of other groups who we're listening to, because it's a very complicated bill. So he's been listening to those groups. So I'll ask you for comment in a moment, Jonathan. And what my recommendation is at the moment is that we should split the bill. There's a bunch of the bill which is really well understood. It's supported, got good support across unions, across business. Everyone's can get behind it, and it's not the most complex part of the bill, or it's parts of the bill where people have been working on it for a long time. I think we should pass that, and I think we could pass that by Christmas, and that could add a really substantial impact, positive impact, both on business and also on wages, which is really what people want, and on gender equity. And then I think we should look at the more contentious and difficult parts of the bill, particularly the multi-sector employee bargaining and the industrial action, and hold those off until we've had a proper long committee meeting, committee review of it. Because what you currently see at the moment is the government is trying to rush this bill through. There's not a single employer group at the business group at the moment who supports it. So none of the national peak bodies in business actually support the bill, what the government is doing. And it's really technical law. So, we have to vote on this bill with having had the legislation for less than just on 2 weeks by the time I vote on it. I know many of the businesses in my community haven't had a chance really to get their heads around it, because it's complex, it's technical, and they don't, they've got really, I think, very significant issues, just, managing the day to day, and, managing, I think, coming out of COVID, dealing with exacerbated energy costs, dealing with, shortage of people. And, for them to engage in this legislation is really difficult. And then finally, we've seen before, and even the previous Fair Work Act, a lot of the problems that this legislation is trying to deal with is what they got wrong the last time they put through legislation. And that wasn't wrong. That wasn't because anyone of malice or anything. It was just, badly drafted, or, with unintended consequences. And that's typical of industrial relations. It's a very complex law. There's a great danger for unintended consequences. And so rushing the bill through, as the government is trying to do at the moment, is, I think, irresponsible for the Australian economy. Those are my assessments. Jonathan, is there anything else that you particularly wanted to highlight or ask people's questions about?
I suppose the other concern for me is particularly just around the time frame, introducing this, not undergoing a process of inquiry and consultation to anticipate sort of the unintended consequences. It's quite problematic. The bill itself as you said, there's some good, there's some bad. And then we've just had government amendments circulated a bit earlier, which deal with fixing some of the problems that the government's seen within the bill. And there's some things in here which, just looking at them at first glance, I can tell there's going to be more concerns. It's Monday now. They want us to vote on this on Thursday morning. There's not enough time here for us to talk to businesses and to get a good sense about what effect this is going to have. And I think it's going to be even harder for small businesses. A lot of them won't be aware this is even happening. This is just going to be sprung on them once it's already law. And so they're finding that, everything they understood about the workplace industrial arrangements was going to have to change.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jonathan. Any questions from others? Emmanuel?
Yes, Allegra, thank you. Thank you so much for hopping online and explaining a little bit about this bill and what concerns this will be for businesses, especially small businesses. And so thank you for the first instance in taking the time out to explain a little bit better, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication as to what people are expecting in comparison to what's about to land on them. Mm-hmm. And I think if anything, one of the things that I thought might be a good idea for us to maybe consider, and that is maybe we should send something out to our database that really explains the key points as to what this bill is doing and what impact it will have, good and bad. And I think we should talk about the good stuff and also the bad stuff that people are not expecting, that is going to hit them. And if they're not prepared for something like this, you're right, it could end up with businesses feeling a bit vulnerable. And coming into Christmas, it's the last thing they need is to, we're trying to, a lot of businesses are trying to survive out there and trying to sort of capture hopefully a sunny Christmas, and we can sort of get them going. But with these sort of laws and going into place that is going to change things a little bit for businesses, I think if we can communicate some key points as to this is what I believe that you should be aware of, and I want you to be mindful that this is going to be landing on your laps. And I feel that the business community will then embrace this a little bit more stronger. I'm happy to communicate out for you, Allegra, anything that you need that sort of communicates what these businesses are about to have happen to them. And I think it's important that right now we stay as communicative as possible and try and be clear for them as possible. The businesses they're overwhelmed by the amount of things they have to do in their business life at the moment, let alone increasing costs, shortage of staff, all these things that are happening in their lives. And anything like this that we can explain a little bit more clearer to them so they can understand might hit the nail on the head for them. Exactly what they want to probably hear, and exactly a solution of how to work around it. Might be better for us to sort of project. Okay.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I appreciate that.
No, thank you.
Amy, any comments or questions from your side?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Thank you. No, not at all. And Emmanuel, is there any specific questions that you had on it, which I'm may take on notice, but
no, not particularly. I mean, you mentioned that there is, there's some parts of the sector which is really good and some parts which are not good. So I suppose it's just really capitalizing on the good and seeing what we can do to project that out to the business community and see what we can do. There's nothing specifically, Allegra, other than, it is a major concern for a lot of businesses. It will definitely be something that businesses are going to feel the pain if they don't do something about it right. And if they handle it correctly, and I think that they'll lessen the burden on them. And I believe if we can just be really sort of clear in our message and the way we're projecting our message, because right now businesses are overwhelmed by a lot of data at the moment because they've got a lot going on. They're trying to find staff, they're trying to keep their current staff, and all these legislations that are put in enterprise agreements that will go in place. In some cases, I think businesses will be all for it because I think there's some good stuff out of that will secure them and their employment with the staff that they do have. But I think it's being mindful about the pitfalls of what is not good for them, and we sort of magnify that or amplify that a little bit so they can be mindful about what they need to be doing and how to go about doing it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, beautiful.
Appreciate it. All right. Okay, well, I'll leave you all, and sorry for the timing. Unfortunately, just
totally understand, Allegra. Totally. Look, it's been recorded. if you are going to project this online, let us know, and then we might be able to do something on our side as well. Okay.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks so much, guys.
All right. Beautiful.
See you soon.
Thank you.